My name is Elena Martinez, 32 years old, and I'm standing in the cardiac unit of Providence Memorial Hospital in Seattle, holding a cashier's check for $80,000, the last of my inheritance from my biological father. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead as I watch through the window while my stepdad, Richard Walsh, lies in the recovery room, tubes running from his arms, monitors beeping steadily beside him. I'd spent 8 years building my savings as a senior project manager at Amazon, working 60-hour weeks, skipping vacations, living in a modest studio when I could afford better. Then came Richard's heart attack 6 months ago. The bills started arriving like an avalanche. $45,000 for the emergency surgery, $18,000 for ICU stays, $12,000 for medications and follow-up procedures, $5,000 for rehabilitation. His insurance covered barely half. My mother had passed 2 years prior, and Richard was drowning in medical debt, calling me in tears. In my other hand, I'm carrying something else, my grandmother's diamond brooch, an Art Deco piece from 1928. My biological father gave it to me before he died when I was 13, telling me it had been worn by my great-grandmother at her wedding, then passed to my grandmother, then to my mother, and finally to me. The platinum setting cradles a centered diamond surrounded by sapphires that catch the light like trapped stars. I'd planned to pin it to Richard's hospital gown today, tell him it was a family heirloom now meant for him, a symbol of permanence, of the 24 years he'd raised me after marrying my mom when I was 8. I smoothed my blazer, remembering him teaching me to drive on Mercer Island, his patient voice coaching me through parallel parking. We used to go to Mariners games every summer, sharing nachos and laughing at the pitchers. Lately, though, his calls had been brief, transactional, always about medical updates, billing questions, never asking how I was managing the stress of funding his recovery. I pushed the doubts away, tucked the brooch carefully in my jacket pocket, and walked through the automatic doors toward his room. The nurse smiled at me as I approached. "He's awake and doing much better. You can go in." I opened the door quietly. Richard was sitting up, looking at his phone, color returning to his face. I held up the check, my voice bright with relief and exhaustion. "Richard, hey. I've got it, the final payment for everything. $80,000. You're completely clear now. No more bills." He glanced up and his expression wasn't gratitude. It was something colder. Annoyed, almost. "Elena, look," he said, his voice sharp and dismissive. "I appreciate the money, I do. But don't bother visiting anymore. You're not my real kid anyway. My daughter Jessica's flying in tomorrow. She's the one who should be handling all this." The words sliced through me. My breath caught in my throat. The hospital room suddenly felt airless, the steady beeping of monitors fading to a dull hum. I stood frozen, the check still extended in my hand, the brooch a sudden weight against my chest. My chest tightened as though someone had wrapped steel bands around my ribs. I'd given him everything, my inheritance, my father's final gift to me, every dollar I'd saved for a down payment on a house, and he'd just told me I didn't belong. Not family. Not real. I searched his face for any sign he understood what he'd just said, waiting for him to take it back, to say he was medicated and confused. His expression remained flat, impatient, like I was a bill collector who'd overstayed her welcome. I lowered the check slowly, my hand trembling slightly as I set it on the table beside his bed. The brooch stayed in my pocket. "Okay," I said quietly, forcing a tight smile that felt like glass cutting my face. "I understand." I turned and walked out. Each step down that hospital corridor felt like wading through concrete. The automatic doors slid open, and Seattle's gray October afternoon greeted me with cold drizzle. I made it to my car in the parking garage before my hands started shaking so badly I couldn't get the key in the ignition. I sat there for 40 minutes, staring at the concrete pillar in front of me, Richard's words playing on repeat, "You're not my real kid anyway." I'd believed in us. In the family we'd built after my mother married him. In the man who'd braided my hair for school pictures and walked me down the aisle at my college graduation because my biological father was gone. But Richard had just told me I was never really part of his family. Something in me shifted that day in the parking garage. Not just hurt, a cold, crystallizing anger that made my vision sharper, my thoughts clearer. Back in my Capitol Hill apartment that night, I couldn't sleep. At 2 a.m., I opened my laptop at my kitchen table, the city lights of Seattle glowing through my window. I logged into my personal finance software where I'd been tracking every payment, every transfer, every dollar I'd sent Richard over the past 6 months. I told myself I was just reviewing, just confirming what I'd spent. That I'd close the laptop and finally get some rest. What I found made sleep impossible. The screen showed my final $80,000 payment from yesterday, but scrolling back through my transaction history revealed the full scope. I'd sent the initial $45,000 for the emergency surgery in March. I'd liquidated half my stock portfolio for that. The $18,000 for ICU care in April came from my savings account, money I'd been setting aside for 5 years. Another $12,000 for medications and follow-ups in May, pulled from my emergency fund. The $5,000 for rehabilitation in June, charged to my credit card. But then I noticed charges on our joint emergency account, the one I'd opened with Richard, just in case, after my mother died, meant strictly for medical crises. I clicked on the first unfamiliar transaction. April 12, $4,200 at Nordstrom. The merchant category code said clothing and accessories. I pulled up the itemized receipt I'd requested months ago when I'd noticed the charge, but Richard had assured me it was for adaptive clothing for recovery. The actual purchases: 2 Tom Ford suits, Italian leather dress shoes, a Tag Heuer watch, silk ties. My stomach dropped. I kept scrolling, my coffee going cold beside me. A $2,800 charge to the resort at Pelican Hill in Newport Beach for a weekend in May. Richard had told me his cardiologist recommended stress reduction therapy at a specialized facility. I pulled up the resort's website. It was a 5-star luxury resort with championship golf courses. I found the reservation confirmation in our shared email: ocean view suite, spa packages, fine dining credits. No cardiac rehabilitation center in sight. 3 round-trip flights to San Diego between April and June, totaling $3,600, all first class. He told me he needed to consult with specialists at UC San Diego Medical Center. I checked the flight times: Thursday evening departures, Sunday night returns. Then I searched his Facebook. Photos from those weekends showed him at Petco Park watching baseball games, at a harbor cruise, at beachfront restaurants with his daughter Jessica and her family. My hands were shaking as I created a new spreadsheet. Row after row of expenses I'd approved, believing they were medical necessities. April 8th, $1,850 at El Gaucho Steakhouse, listed in his text to me as meeting with medical billing advocate over dinner. April 22nd, $925 at Saks Fifth Avenue for what he'd called compression garments, actually Gucci sunglasses and Hermes cologne. May 5th, $3,400 at Ben Bridge Jeweler for a medical alert bracelet, actually a gold chain and diamond-studded pendant. May 18th, $2,100 for home medical monitoring equipment, actually a 65-inch OLED TV and sound system. June 3rd, $1,650 for mobility assistance devices, actually a complete set of Callaway golf clubs. June 14th, $2,900 for specialized aquatic therapy sessions, actually a spa weekend at a Woodinville resort. June 28th, $1,200 for medical transportation services, actually premium detailing for his Lexus ES. The fraudulent expenses totaled $24,625 on top of the $80,000 in legitimate medical bills I'd paid. I leaned back in my kitchen chair, my vision blurring with rage and disbelief. I'd liquidated my father's inheritance, the only thing I had left of him. I'd emptied my savings account, money I'd sacrificed: vacations, new clothes, dinners out to build. I'd cashed out investments I'd spent nearly a decade carefully growing. All while Richard used our emergency account like his personal luxury fund. He hadn't just taken my money. He'd taken my grief for my mother, weaponized my desperate need to honor her memory by caring for the man she loved, and turned it into his personal piggy bank. I stood up, pacing my small apartment, the hardwood floors creaking under my feet. I remembered every weekend I'd worked, every promotion dinner I'd skipped, every time I'd looked at flights to visit friends in California and closed the browser because I needed to save money in case Richard needs more help. But I wasn't his kid. Not his real one. He'd made that clear. A notification popped up on my screen. A new charge alert on our joint emergency account. I'd set up alerts for any transaction over $500. Richard's name on the purchase. A $1,400 charge at a golf resort pro shop in Bellevue. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. It had been less than 24 hours since he'd told me I wasn't his real child, and he was already spending more of my money on golf equipment. I opened my banking app, my finger hovering over the joint account settings. I thought of my mother's face at our family photos, how she'd beam when she talked about our perfect blended family. How she'd made me promise, in her final weeks, to look after Richard because he'll need you. But my mother was gone. And Richard had made his choice the moment he said those words in that hospital room. I pressed close account. Then I pressed confirm. The screen flashed, account successfully closed. All linked cards have been deactivated. For the first time in 6 months, I felt something other than exhaustion. I felt powerful. The next afternoon, I was at my desk at Amazon, trying to focus on a product launch timeline, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my Uncle James, my mother's older brother who lived in Spokane. He'd retired 3 years ago after 35 years as a forensic accountant for the state. He was the family's voice of reason, the one who'd helped me set up my first investment account. His voice came through heavy and urgent. Elena Mija. I need to talk to you about Richard. It's important. I stepped out of my open office into a quiet conference room, my heart already sinking. What's going on? I got a call from Angela Reyes, you remember her? She's a partner at that elder law firm downtown, Reyes and Thompson. He paused, and I could hear him taking a breath. Richard's in serious trouble, Elena. Legal trouble. I sat down heavily in one of the conference chairs. What kind of trouble? Gambling. Online poker, sports betting platforms, offshore casino sites. Angela's firm is representing one of his creditors. Apparently, he owes over $140,000 to various platforms and private lenders. Some of these are high-interest loans from the kind of people who don't just send collection letters. They show up in person. The room tilted slightly. Gambling. I thought of all those specialist consultations in San Diego. All those therapy sessions. James continued, his voice tight with disapproval. Those medical bills you paid were real. The surgery, the ICU, all of that happened. But Angela says he's been taking the insurance payouts and the money you sent him and using it as bankroll for his gambling. Every dollar you gave him freed up cash he could dump into his poker accounts. He's been chasing losses for at least 18 months, maybe longer. My hand gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. How bad is it? Angela says the creditors have already filed a lien on his house in Redmond. He's got 90 days to pay at least $75,000 or they'll start foreclosure proceedings. And these aren't all legitimate creditors, Elena. Some of these loans came from private individuals, loan sharks, basically. People who charge 15% interest monthly. I thought of Richard's house, the 4-bedroom craftsman my mother had loved, where I'd spent my teenage years. Where her garden still bloomed every spring because Richard hired someone to maintain it. What about Jessica? I asked. His real daughter. Where's she in all this? James sighed. That's the thing. Angela mentioned that Jessica hasn't spoken to Richard in over a year. Apparently, he borrowed $30,000 from her 2 years ago for what he said were medical expenses after your mother passed. She found out he'd spent it at a casino in Las Vegas. She cut him off completely. My chest tightened. So Richard had already burned through his biological daughter's goodwill and money. And then he'd turn to me. There's something else, James said quietly. He's been telling people, mutual friends, some family, that you've been controlling his finances, that you've been holding his medical care hostage to manipulate him. Angela heard it through the community grapevine. He's been setting up a narrative where you're the villain. The words hit like ice water. While I'd been liquidating my inheritance to save him, he'd been telling people I was abusing him. Elena, I know this is a lot, James said gently. But I had to tell you. You need to protect yourself. These creditors might come after you if they think you're financially connected to him. And if he's already lying about you. He trailed off. I stared at the blank wall of the conference room, my reflection faint in the darkened window. He told me yesterday I wasn't his real kid, I said, my voice flat. After I paid off his final medical bills. $80,000. He told me not to visit anymore because Jessica is his real daughter. The silence on the other end was long and heavy. Finally, James spoke, his voice rough with anger. That son of a, he stopped himself. Elena, listen to me. Your mother would not want you destroying yourself for a man who talks to you like that. She would want you to protect yourself, your future. You understand? I nodded even though he couldn't see me. I closed our joint account yesterday. Good. That's good. Relief flooded his voice. Keep all your documentation. Every receipt, every bank statement, every text message where he asked for money. If he tries to come after you legally or keep spreading lies, you'll need evidence. After we hung up, I sat in that conference room for another 20 minutes, staring at my phone. I thought about the brooch still in my jacket pocket, the one I'd almost given him. The one that had survived wars, the Depression, my great-grandmother's emigration from Mexico, my grandmother's struggles, my mother's cancer. I'd almost handed it to a man who gambled away 6 figures and then told me I wasn't really his family. That evening, I went to my bank and rented a safety deposit box. I placed my grandmother's brooch inside, along with my mother's wedding ring, my father's pocket watch, and the deed to a small plot of land in New Mexico my biological father had left me. Everything that mattered, everything that represented my real family, I locked it all away where Richard's chaos couldn't touch it. As I turned the key in the safety deposit box, I felt something settle inside me. These were mine to protect. My legacy. My history. Not his to pawn or sell or leverage for one more spin of the roulette wheel. I drove home through Seattle's evening rain feeling lighter than I had in months. 2 months went by. November turned into December, and Seattle's gray skies deepened into winter darkness. I threw myself into work, leading a major product launch that earned me recognition from the VP level. I started going to a boxing gym 3 mornings a week, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for when I was juggling Richard's constant crises. I heard nothing from Richard. Not a text, not a call, nothing. I heard through my Uncle James that Jessica hadn't returned his calls either, that Richard had been making increasingly frantic posts on Facebook about family betrayal, though he never named names. I'd started sleeping through the night again. Then, on a Tuesday evening in early December, my phone lit up with Richard's name. I was in my apartment, making dinner, a podcast playing in the background. I stared at the screen, my heart rate picking up despite myself. I almost let it go to voicemail. My finger hovered over the decline button. But something in me needed to hear this. Needed to know what he'd say after 2 months of silence. I answered. Hello. Elena. His voice was frantic, breathless, words tumbling over each other in barely controlled panic. Elena, thank God. You have to help me. I need surgery again. The blockage came back. But the insurance denied the claim. They're saying it's too soon for another procedure. The hospital is threatening to send me to collections. I don't have anything left. The house, they're taking the house. Elena, please. Can you help? Can you send? I stood in my kitchen, the knife I'd been using to chop vegetables still in my hand, and I felt nothing but cold clarity. How much? I asked, my voice flat. $35,000. If I can pay $35,000, they'll schedule the surgery and the creditors will give me another extension on the house. Elena, I know we had that misunderstanding at the hospital, but you're still family, you know that. I was medicated, I didn't mean I need you. I've always been able to count on you. That misunderstanding. After everything, that's what he called it. I set the knife down carefully on the cutting board. I thought of my empty savings account. My liquidated investments. My father's inheritance, gone. The years I'd spent building toward buying a home, all erased. I thought of the lies. The golf clubs. The luxury resorts. The gambling debts. The words he'd said, "You're not my real kid anyway." Richard, I said, my voice steady and cold. I said, "Real kids only, remember?" There was a beat of shocked silence. What? Elena, wait. You can't be serious. I'm in the hospital. I could die. Figure it out, I said quietly. And I hung up. My hands were trembling, but my heart was steady. I blocked his number immediately, then sat down on my couch, phone still in my hand. For a long moment, I just breathed. In and out. Waiting for the guilt, the second-guessing, the urge to call him back. It never came. Instead, I felt strong. Like I'd finally said the one word I should have said months ago, years ago maybe. No. The next morning, I woke up to 37 notifications on my phone. My stomach sank as I scrolled through them, tags on Facebook, mentions on Instagram, text messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. I opened Facebook with a sense of dread. There, at the top of my feed, was Richard's post from 11 p.m. the previous night. When you raise a child as your own for over 20 years, you think they'll be there when you need them most. Today I learned that some people only love you when it's convenient. I'm facing a life-threatening medical emergency, and my stepdaughter has turned her back on me completely. She has the means to help but chooses to let me suffer. I guess blood really is thicker than water. To anyone reading this with stepchildren, be warned. They're not really yours. #heartbroken, #family betrayal, #step-parent struggles. He tagged me in it. The comments were already piling up. Dozens of them. That's absolutely disgusting. How could she abandon you? Family is family. This is heartless. I always knew there was something off about her. So cold. Praying for you, Richard. You deserve better. Some people I'd gone to high school with, some distant relatives, some of Richard's friends I'd met at barbecues years ago. All of them weighing in on a situation they knew nothing about. A few confused comments. Wait, what's the full story here? Is there more context? But they were drowned out by the outrage. My face burned as I read comment after comment attacking my character, my compassion, my worth as a human being. I felt my breathing get shallow, my hands starting to shake. I clicked over to compose a response. My fingers flew across my phone keyboard. Since Richard has decided to make this public, I paid $80,000 of his medical bills over 6 months, liquidating my inheritance from my deceased father. I also covered an additional $24,625 in fraudulent charges he made on our shared emergency account, luxury resort stays, designer clothing, golf equipment, and trips to San Diego that he claimed were medical consultations. Upon discovering he has $140,000 in gambling debts to loan sharks and offshore casinos, and after he told me to my face that I'm not his real kid anyway, I chose to protect myself financially. I have documentation of every dollar and every lie. Anyone who wants to discuss this further can. I stopped typing. My thumb hovered over the post button. No. I deleted every word. Because posting that, even though it was all true, even though I had receipts for every claim, would drag me into his mud. Would make me look defensive, petty, like I was airing dirty laundry for sympathy. The people who really knew me, who mattered, already knew my character. The rest were strangers performing outrage on social media, and nothing I said would change their minds. I took a screenshot of his post for my records, then I blocked Richard on every platform. I muted notifications from the mutual friends who'd commented. I sent a brief text to the few people whose opinions I actually cared about. Richard posted something about me on Facebook. It's not accurate. I'll explain in person if you'd like, but I'm not engaging publicly. Hope you understand. Then I closed the apps and made myself breakfast. Let him spin his victim story. I knew the truth. My Uncle James knew the truth. My close friends knew the truth. That would have to be enough. 3 days later, on Friday evening, there was a knock at my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and saw a man I didn't recognize at first, mid-40s, exhausted looking, wearing a wrinkled button-down shirt and holding a baseball cap in his hands. Then I recognized him. David Walsh. Richard's son from his first marriage, before he married my mother. I'd met him maybe 4 times in my life. He lived in Portland and rarely came around. At my mother's funeral, he'd given me a brief, awkward hug and left early. I opened the door cautiously. David. Elena. Hey, I'm sorry to just show up like this. Can we talk? Just for a few minutes. I hesitated, then stepped back to let him in. He walked into my apartment, looking around like he was trying to figure out what to say. I saw Richard's post, he said finally, still standing awkwardly in my entryway. The one about you abandoning him. And I had to come tell you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what he's putting you through. I blinked. You're apologizing? I should have warned you years ago. David sat heavily on my couch, his shoulders slumped. After his first wife, my mom, died, Richard went off the rails. He started gambling. Lost a chunk of mom's life insurance at a casino in Vegas within 6 months. I confronted him, and he promised he'd stop. He didn't. He borrowed money from me, from Jessica, from our Aunt Karen. Always for emergencies. Always with promises to pay us back. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. When he married your mom, I thought maybe he'd changed. She was so good for him. But after she died, he shook his head. Jessica called me last year, told me he'd hit her up for 30 grand and gambled it all away. She cut him off. I'd already cut him off 2 years before that. I thought maybe he'd gotten help, gotten clean. But then I saw his post about you, and I knew he was doing it again. Using someone else. And I felt sick. I sat down in the chair across from him, my mind racing. You knew he had a gambling problem and you didn't say anything? I didn't know he was targeting you, David said, his voice breaking slightly. I thought maybe with you being his stepdaughter, not his bio kid, he wouldn't feel entitled to your money the same way. I was wrong. I'm sorry. I should have warned you. We sat in silence for a moment. I saw the bills, he continued. The medical bills were real, the heart attack, the surgery, all of that. But I also saw he was still gambling. His bookie actually called me 2 months ago, asking if I'd co-sign a loan for Richard. I told him to go to hell. David looked at me directly. How much did he get from you? Over 100,000, I said quietly. Including fraudulent charges he disguised as medical expenses. David closed his eyes. Jesus Christ. He told me I wasn't his real kid, I added, my voice harder than I intended. To my face, in the hospital, right after I paid off his final bills. That's what he does, David said bitterly. When you stop being useful, you stop being family. Jessica got the same treatment. So did I. The difference is you actually came through for him. You gave him everything and he still said it. He stood up, pulling something out of his jacket pocket, a business card. This is my number. If he harasses you, if those creditors come after you, call me. I'll testify that he has a documented gambling addiction, that he's defrauded multiple family members. I'll help you protect yourself however I can. He headed toward the door, then turned back. Your mom, Maria, she was wonderful. She would be so proud of you for setting boundaries. Richard doesn't deserve what you gave him. But for what it's worth, thank you for trying. For caring about him when nobody else could anymore. After he left, I sat on my couch for a long time, holding his business card. I hadn't expected an ally. Hadn't expected anyone from Richard's side to see the truth. But David had. And somehow, that made breathing a little easier. The next morning, I made a decision. I called my Uncle James. I want to help David and Jessica, I told him. Richard's kids from his first marriage. They were victims of his gambling too. David came to see me yesterday, he's struggling. Lost his job in Portland 6 months ago, partially because he was so stressed dealing with Richard's chaos. And Jessica, she has 2 kids and she's still paying off the debt she took on trying to help Richard before she realized what he was doing. James was quiet for a moment. What are you thinking? I can't give them much. But I can give them something. David needs help with his resume, job connections. I know people in Portland's tech scene who might be hiring. And Jessica. I want to set up a small education fund for her kids. Something Richard can never touch. $500 a month until they're 18. Can you help me set that up so it's legally protected from creditors? You're serious? James sounded stunned. They didn't ask me for anything, I said. But they're innocent in this. They tried to help their father and got burned just like I did. Richard gets nothing. But them? I can do this much. Over the next week, I reached out to David with job leads at companies where I had contacts. I connected him with a recruiter I'd worked with who specialized in supply chain management, his field. Within 2 weeks, he had 3 interviews lined up. I set up the education fund for Jessica's children through a trust James helped me structure. Jessica cried when I called to tell her. "You don't have to do this," she kept saying. "I know," I told her. "But I want to. Your kids shouldn't suffer because your father made bad choices. Neither should you." David sent me a text a month later. "Got the job. Start in January. I don't know how to thank you." I replied simply, "Just take care of yourself. That's enough." Helping them didn't erase what Richard had done. But it felt right. Like I was protecting the people who deserved it while refusing to enable the one who didn't. I went back to the bank and added one more thing to my safety deposit box, a letter I'd written to myself, detailing everything that had happened. Every dollar spent, every lie discovered, every moment of manipulation. I dated it and sealed it in an envelope. If I ever doubted myself, if Richard ever tried to rewrite history, I'd have this. The truth in my own handwriting. Protected. 3 months later, I got the update I'd been expecting but dreading. My Uncle James called on a Saturday morning in March. "Richard's house went to foreclosure last week. The creditors are seizing whatever assets they can find. He's filed for bankruptcy." "Where is he now?" I asked. "Moved into a studio apartment in Renton. One of those month-to-month places. His Social Security barely covers it." James paused. "He's been trying to contact Jessica and David again. They're not responding." "Good," I said firmly. "There's something else," James continued. "He's been telling people he's dying, that his heart is failing and he needs another surgery he can't afford. He started a GoFundMe." My stomach turned. "Is it true? About his heart?" I called his cardiologist's office. I still had the number from when your mom was coordinating his care. They can't give me details because of HIPAA, but the nurse I spoke to said he's been seen regularly and his condition is stable with medication. She wouldn't say that if he were actively dying. Another lie. Another manipulation. "Let him raise money from strangers then," I said. "I'm done." And I was. I felt no guilt, no second-guessing. Just clarity. I'd learned the difference between helping and enabling. Between family and people who use the word family as a weapon. That spring, I did something I'd been putting off for years. I enrolled in a weekend painting class at Gage Academy of Art. Something my mother had always encouraged me to do. She'd known I loved art, but never made time for it. I spent Saturday mornings mixing colors on canvas, learning to see light and shadow differently. I wasn't good at it, not yet, but I loved it. The quiet focus. The permission to create something just for myself. I also started volunteering at Mary's Place, a family homeless shelter in Seattle. 2 evenings a month, I helped serve dinner and organize donations. I met women there who reminded me of myself, educated, hardworking, but caught in circumstances beyond their control. Some fleeing abuse. Some bankrupted by medical bills. Some exploited by family members. I understood them in ways I hadn't before. On a sunny afternoon in May, almost 7 months after that final phone call with Richard, I sat in Volunteer Park with a book and my thoughts. My phone buzzed with a text from David. 1 year at the new job next month. Got promoted to senior manager. Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't. I smiled and replied, "You did the work. Proud of you." Another text, this one from Uncle James. Jessica's daughter got accepted to that STEM summer camp. The education fund covered it. She's over the moon. I looked out at the Seattle skyline, at the Space Needle rising against the blue sky, at families having picnics on the grass. I thought about my grandmother's brooch, safe in its vault. About my mother's memory, no longer tangled up in Richard's manipulation. About my savings account, slowly rebuilding. I'd lost money. I'd lost the fantasy of a blended family that loved me unconditionally. I'd lost my naivety about who I could trust. But I'd gained something more valuable, boundaries. Self-respect. The knowledge that I could survive being called heartless by people who didn't know the truth because I knew the truth. Love wasn't measured in dollars sacrificed. Family wasn't about bleeding yourself dry to prove your worth. Real family, the kind my mother had wanted for me, protected each other without exploitation, showed up without keeping score, cared without conditions. Richard had taught me what family wasn't. And in doing so, he'd freed me to find what family could be. I opened my book, felt the warm sun on my face, and started reading. My future was mine again. And I was going to guard it carefully.